Welcome to my ranking of my top 20 Arnold Schwarzenegger films. Now, initially, I was just going to make a top 10 for this, but I had so many honourable mentions creeping onto the bottom of my handwritten notes that I thought to myself, you know what, let's just drag this out and make it a top 20. I have seen, in total, 22 Arnie films. The two that are not going to be on this list today, one of them is Batman and Robin, and the other is Terminator Salvation, which I've decided not to include because Arnie doesn't really do any acting in that film. They've just used his likeness for one or two scenes, not enough to justify inclusion. And I should also say that you're not going to see any comedies on here like Twins and Kindergarten Cop. I'm just not into that stuff. For me, Arnie is at his best when he's blowing stuff up and making sure that the world's villains die much deserved death. So with that in mind, let's get on with it and find out what is my 20th favourite Arnie film. So first up we have The Last Stand. I watched this with my dad not long after it came out actually, and even though it was nice to see Arnie acting again after a really, really long break of like 11 years, it was still a pretty mediocre film from what I can remember. I actually had to go on Wiki and look up the plot for this just to remind myself what happened. But so I don't think I'll be going back to it anytime soon unless I'm doing some sort of insane Arnie marathon or something. It was an okay thriller, but if it didn't have Arnie in it, I'd probably forgotten about it already. So at 19 we have Red Sonja. This is probably the film that inspired Lord of the Rings. I think they were probably looking at this, but no, just kidding. This is a fantasy adventure from the 80s that starred Bridget Nielsen as well as Arnie, and I saw it as a teenager. It came on TV one time and I thought, oh, this film's got Arnie in it. I'm going to have to take this for our sort of home video collection that we had at the time. And it was quite a cheesy, mediocre film from what I can remember, and we taped over that within like 2 weeks. I'd be curious to watch it now all these years later, but I wouldn't be expecting that much. And I think compared to Arnie's Conan films, this is probably the weakest of his fantasy adventures of this type. This is by far the worst of Arnie's Terminator films. It's the worst Terminator film, period. I mean, it's not terrible, it's still watchable. It just doesn't have that high quality that a lot of the other films in the franchise do. It's the worst of a good bunch, shall we say. For a while it rankled that this was the last film in the series because it just wouldn't finish things off very well. I think now that we've got Dark Fate, a much better movie, then I can watch Genesis thinking, oh well, okay, it's just a sort of stop in the road and then we'll get to the proper finale. A lot of the roles were miscast in this. I think they're just a bunch of people who were maybe hot at the time but just didn't really suit the roles that they were playing. It's a weird one. The Expendables was an okay film, but given that my expectations were through the roof for this, I probably felt a little bit disappointed with what we got. I don't think the action side of the film was as good as it should have been, and I didn't like that they were using CGI. I thought they were going back to the 80s, like a proper 80s action thriller with all these guys in it. Camaraderie and the banter, though, was very, very good. And I think if I watched it again now, I would enjoy it a lot more because the expectations wouldn't be there anymore. I'd probably just be able to kick back and enjoy it. I need to do that, really. So hot on the heels of Expendables 1, we have number 2 next on the list. I enjoyed this one a lot more. It seemed to go more full-on cheese this time. I had a big grin on my face throughout, and it had more Arnie. And we come back to the issue of expectations. You know, the first film had all these expectations. They weren't quite met. With the second film, I hardly expected anything, so I was just able to enjoy it more as a result. I've not seen The Expendables 3, which surprises me because I enjoyed number 2 sufficiently enough that I probably would have gone on to watch number 3. I don't understand why I didn't do that, but certainly in the future I'd like to watch number 3. And I believe, even after all these years, they're still planning on making number 4 and a spin-off, so this could end up being quite a big series by the time that they're done. I would like to go back and do a full run-through of this series, I think, when it's all done and dusted, you know. And I think I'll probably enjoy it a lot more next time than I did all those years ago. But for now, this is the last we're going to see of the Expendables on this list. So number 15, we've got Raw Deal. Now, when I was first going through in my head what this rankings would look like, I had Raw Deal like 9th or 10th probably, but it just goes to show the amount of depth that Arnie has on his CV that you just don't realise until you sit down and start writing his films down. We had this on video when I was growing up, and I must have watched it like 6 or 7 times. It's like the Chicago gangster version of Commando almost. I mean, he's mowing down gangsters by the dozen in the last half an hour. I don't think the first hour is gripping enough for this to be one of Arnie's true classics, but it does have one of his all-time greatest scenes, in my opinion, when he puts the Rolling Stones cassette tape into his car and then starts driving around with his hand on with one hand on the wheel and the other hand sort of shooting guys on these coal mountain things. And Robert Davi is very good in this as well. Conan the Destroyer is the sequel to Conan the Barbarian. Now, I've only seen this one once, whereas Conan the Barbarian, that was the Conan film of my childhood. We had it on video, watched it over and over again. So I can't remember Conan the Destroyer that well. I do remember it being at least better than Red Sonja in terms of Arnie's fantasy films. I always used to get away with watching Conan when I was a kid, because if my mum or dad saw me watching it on the TV upstairs, I'd be like, oh no, you got nothing, no need to worry, it's just like a He-Man thing. And I'd get away with it every time. Fun fact, this film is one of the first DVDs I ever bought. It had one of those crappy fold-up cardboard covers, the likes of which you don't see anymore. Really cheap and nasty stuff. But the film itself, I'm surprised more people don't talk about it or have seen it. It's a good, solid thriller. It takes place mostly in Colombia. It's got a really nasty bad guy in it. There's this one scene with a snake, which is just absolutely horrible. It's sort of a little bit out of place in the movie, actually, but last 20 minutes has got a good twist, and it's just very well written. The finale to this film, you don't see it coming. It feels really original and fresh, and I would definitely recommend seeing this film if you've not seen it before. Okay, I lied. So there is one comedy on the list, although I don't really think of it that way. I think of it more as a light-hearted action romp with a little bit of parody in it. I do think that Arnie could have left this another 10 years to do, because in '93 he was still at the peak of his powers. So at the time I was like, no, don't make something like this, just carry on making serious action films. I don't think it did that well at the box office because it came out at the same time as Jurassic Park. I distinctly remember going to the cinema to watch Jurassic Park, and there was a massive poster of Last Action Hero in the foyer which looked really cool, and I was like, whoa, I've got to see that, whatever it is. There's a great line in this film, by the way, where Arnie says something like, well, in the previous film I killed 148 bad guys, but this time we're going for more character development, so I only killed 52. So this is the better of the two Conan films that I was talking about before. I'm not entirely sure that that picture that I just put up, by the way, is from the first Conan film. It's been a while now since I watched these two, but certainly the first one was the one that I watched over and over again when I was a kid. It's very violent compared to the second one. And because it came out in '82, I think, that would make it the earliest Arnie film on this rankings. I mean, he has got credits from before Conan the Barbarian, but this is probably the earliest film that people still watch, shall we say. So into the top 10 we go. This, in my opinion, is an underrated Terminator film. When I first saw it, I was probably as disappointed as anyone else, but it didn't help that I'd been drinking on the same day that I went to the cinema to see it with some friends. I'd had about 3 pints of beer by the time I got to the cinema, and I was so tipsy I fell asleep for about 10 minutes halfway through, which is not ideal. But in later years, whenever I've rewatched the film, I've enjoyed it a little bit more every single time. It's got to the point now where I look forward to watching it if I'm doing a Terminator marathon. And I think if you rewatch this, I think you'll find that it is better than you probably remember. It doesn't have that many things that are bad about it. It's just not as great as the masterpieces that come before. And I think it's got a really good ending. It's got the ending that T2 possibly should have had. They just repeated the same ending in T2 that they had in T1, really. So there is that as well. Next up, we have Eraser, an action thriller from the mid-90s. I'm surprised more people don't talk about this one, actually, when they talk about Arnie, because it's really, really good. It's got these incredible guns in it with these X-ray sights. It had a great sequence at a zoo. It had this incredible sequence on a plane. I could just go on and on and on. And James Caan as a villain, absolutely brilliant. At number 8, we've got True Lies. Some people might have this higher than number 8. It's a great film, very long from what I can remember, directed by James Cameron. It's got Bill Paxton, Jamie Lee Curtis in it, 2 actors I absolutely love. And the last 15 minutes, I mean, it might not look much now, but back in the 90s, this was just the most incredible sequence to end a movie. I was like, whoa, look at the stuff they can do now. Absolutely incredible. I'm not sure there's a Blu-ray for this. Last time I checked a few years ago, there wasn't one. I'll have to have a look into that, because I've not seen this film in quite some time, but I watched it several times back in the day. It's really, really good. Terminator Dark Fate really stunned me, because after a number of good but not great Terminator films, we get this. I mean, it's awesome. If you've not seen it, give it a chance. I was on the edge of my seat watching this film in a way that I've not felt since the ending to T2, where I was just thinking to myself, how on earth are they going to kill the T-1000? This is ridiculous. And this has got a great sort of half-human, half-Terminator female soldier in it. It doesn't sound good when I'm saying it out loud, but honestly, this character is amazing. I could watch her in so many sequels. There probably won't be any because the box office takings were really poor. But if this was the last film in the series, then they've gone out on a high because this is a really, really top film, and I was extremely satisfied with it. All that matters to me now is Jenny. Who doesn't love Commando? It's friggin' awesome. Just Arnie shooting the shit out of hundreds of soldiers, blowing buildings up. He goes shopping for guns with a trolley in this film. That's how cool it is. It's just amazing. One-liners all the way through. Vernon Wells playing one of the best villains ever, wearing chainmail in 1980s America. It's just the corniest, brilliantest film you've ever seen. Well, that's exaggerating a little bit, but it is a great movie. Killian, I'm going to live to see you eat that contract, but you better make room for my fist, because I'm going to ram it into your stomach and break your goddamn spine! Ah! What more can be said about The Terminator, one of the great sci-fi horror films of all time? I described it that way, but I didn't include it in my recent top 100 horror films of all time. I kind of thought to myself, maybe it's not quite a horror, but it was certainly the first horror-type experience I ever had in my life. I watched this when I was about 6 or 7. I was way too young, but it totally captured my imagination. I can remember going to primary school and asking people if they'd seen The Terminator, and the other kids were like, oh, what's that? I loved the way, especially, that the Terminator keeps finding new ways to come back at the end of the film. So he comes back without his skin off, and I was like, whoa, what the hell's this? And then later on, he comes back again with half of his body missing. It's just brilliantly written stuff. And I love the scene where he goes into the police station and kills those 17 guys. It's just a great action sequence. At number 3, we've got Predator. Now, this was one of the first proper copies of a film that me and my dad owned in the 90s, as in it had a proper box and had come from a shop. The rest of our films were mostly taped off the TV. Now, the significance of this is that in the 1990s in the UK, anything on TV was heavily censored. So if you're watching a horror film, chances are somebody had gone through it beforehand and taken all the more extreme bits of gore out. But if you bought a film from a shop, it was completely uncut. So as a 10 or 11-year-old watching Predator in its normal state, seeing all these skin bodies in the trees, it felt like really extreme stuff to me at the time. But it was really exciting. This film just never gets old, watching all these guys go into this South American country. I'm not sure which country it's meant to be, actually, and shoot about 50 men, and then they get harassed by the Predator and picked off one by one. It's absolutely brilliant. And then you've got Arnie's big confrontation with the Predator at the end. It's got great music, this, and some really quotable lines. This stuff will make you a goddamn sexual tyrannosaurus, just like me. Just missing out on the top spot, we have Terminator 2. I really went back and forth between number 1 and number 2 on this list. I couldn't make my mind up. This is an amazing action film. It blew me away when I saw it as a kid. I was about 11, I think, when we rented it. I was living in Scotland at the time. Could not take my eyes off the screen, and I went to bed just floating up the stairs. I was that happy about the amazing film I'd just watched. I can't really pick any faults in T2. It's just one of the all-time classic action films. Full credit to James Cameron for doing a sequel, and I wouldn't say improving over the first one significantly, but he's just followed on one great sci-fi action film with another one. It's brilliant. And there we have it, number 1, Total Recall. I don't know if this is a surprise to people, though I could easily imagine more people would maybe plump for T2 or Predator, or maybe even True Lies as their top film, but for me, this is Arnie's greatest film. Not only that, but one of the most amazing science fiction / action films of all time. It's just got so much creativity running through its veins from scene to scene to scene. You've got the Johnny Cab and Benny's treachery, and Mars looks amazing. The production design in this film is just something else. So many great one-liners as well. See you at the party, Richter! Rachel Takotin, great lead actress. Sharon Stone's in this. She's amazing too. It's just a great film all the way through. I absolutely love it. I've even got a steelbook for it, which has had pride of place on my shelf for about 15 years. It's not rare. You can probably still pick it up now. So yeah, Total Recall. For me, sublime Arnie entertainment. It's my number 1. And that's the end of my list. So let me know what you think. And apart from that, I will see you again next time. I'll be back.